Hello, welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. I'm Tara Reid. I'm filling in for Kim while she's traveling. She will be back tomorrow at her new time, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, and you'll be able to find us Monday through Friday on Rumble exclusively. So yesterday, there was a bombshell report by Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Seymour Hersh. He came out squarely blaming the U.S. with the help of Norway for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, according to his reporting. If this is true, which it's likely that it is, this would be an outright act of war. With us now to go over this is the former weapons inspector and former Marine Intelligence, Scott Ritter. So now, for the audience that may not know, you have a vast amount of experience. I mean, you were a former weapons inspector and Marine Intelligence. Could you tell a little bit about like your whistleblowing about the weapons of mass destruction and calling out the lies from the then administration and that experience?
Well, I don't like to use the term whistleblowing because, first of all, that implies that I was a U.S. government employee constrained by laws on speaking out. There would be proper processes and procedures. I was in a unique situation where I was a UN weapons inspector who had resigned from the United Nations, and then I was seeking to inform U.S. Congress, not because I had any legal obligation to do so, but I had a moral obligation as an American citizen. So I think whistleblowing is a very specific term that has very specific legal ramifications attached to it. I don't fit the term, the legal definition of whistleblower, but I understand the intent, because I think part of the intent of whistleblowers is the concept of truth telling. And in that, I can say, yes, I was a truth teller. So as a weapons inspector who spent 7 years on the ground in Iraq, hunting down Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, I was in a unique position to challenge the assertions made by the Bush administration in the lead up to the decision to invade Iraq in 2003, that there were quantities of weapons of mass destruction that posed a threat to the national security of the United States and or its allies worthy of military force. I said clearly that is not the case. I wasn't guessing. It was based upon 7 years of field work. I can say this. I was, if not the most knowledgeable, one of the most knowledgeable people in the world about the totality of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs and what the final disposition of these were. I can say safely that I knew more about Iraqi WMD than anybody in the Bush administration or anybody in the CIA that were influencing the policy. And I felt, because I was such empowered, that I had a moral obligation to speak out and try and not only educate the American public, but in doing so, to put pressure on the American government not to go to war on the basis of lies. I failed on both accounts, but at least I gave it the old college try.
Well, I don't see that as failing. You did everything you could. And now, people do know the truth, and thank you for your service and thank you for what you did. So a lot's happening with Ukraine, and you have been making really educated and deeply analytical commentary about Ukraine. In fact, I watch a lot of your work, and I know some of the audience watching probably does as well, if not all, that really looks at this proxy war the US and NATO is fighting against Russia via Ukraine. And one of the things that struck me was that you said Ukraine has lost, right? So could you expand a little bit on that and tell and educate our audience how you see the audience, how Ukraine has basically lost the plot, so to speak?
Sure. Let me just start off by explaining to your audience that contrary to popular belief, I don't have a hotline here that I get to call up Vladimir Putin and say, "Hey, Vlad, what's going on? What's the situation?"
Neither do I, and I know I've been accused of the same thing, but neither one of us have a line to the Kremlin. No.
I am, like everybody else, thousands of miles removed from this problem, and I'm looking at it, remotely. I'm a prisoner of the data that's available, and I think we need to acknowledge that it's incomplete data. And some of it's inaccurate data. So sorting through this is a problem. Now, What I will say is that I'm a trained intelligence professional whose job it was, and today, even though I'm not working for the government, continues to be sorting through this kind of information, trying to identify the dots of relevance and then connect the dots to come up with some sort of conclusion that is as reflective as possible of reality. So that's what you're getting. When it comes to military analysis, I'm also somebody who has significant experience in conceptualizing, planning, and implementing military operations in both peacetime and in wartime. One of the more invaluable experiences was in the lead up to Desert Storm, where I was tasked with identifying weaknesses, gaps in the Iraqi defensive lines. That required me to, using this giant computer known as Janus, Janus for anybody who wants to Google it and study it, we built, using detailed satellite imagery of the Iraqi defenses, a computerized model of the defenses, and then we populated it with the real forces that Iraq had. And this required us to not only populate it with, numerical functions representing people, tanks, but to give them viability. Were these well-trained troops? Were they troops with good morale? Did they have good command and control? Was there good maintenance? All of these become numerical factors to get put in and programmed in. And then we had to do the same with the Marine forces. And what you try to do is get close to reality as possible. You set up the forces, you define the tactics, and then you hit play. And the computer runs it through. And believe me, we ran countless scenarios through where we had to tweak as best as possible to get reality. And I became very good at learning what the different factors were, in terms of morale, equipment, training, et cetera, and how they interacted with each other, what the probability of kill of artillery and armor and things of that nature to generate casualty figures. And that stuck with me because I did that for many, many months on a daily basis. And I did it so well, I was actually invited into General Schwarzkopf's headquarters because people respected the work that I had done. And the reason why I bring that up isn't to brag. Last thing I'm going to do is brag about a war that's over 30 years old. But what I'm trying to say is that when I come up with a decision about the military conflict, it's not done in the haphazard fashion.
Right.
In many ways, what I'm doing today is replicating that same experience, that same approach that I used with the Janus system. I'm doing it today in my mind on paper to come up with the analysis. So I'm trying to put that forward so people understand where I'm coming from and how I get to where I'm going. I'm not just somebody who randomly decides X, Y, and Z.
Right.
When the proof is in the pudding. When I'll be the first to admit I got it wrong when Russia first invaded, because I programmed my Janus computer to say that the Russians were going to come in hard, doctrinally, do what they always are trained to do. I didn't program my computer properly. And so the result was different. The Russians came in soft. They weren't using doctrine. My numerics were off totally. And boom. And so like any intelligence professor, because believe me, when I first ran the numbers in the lead up to the Gulf War, we got it wrong too. The Marines were getting beat by the Iraqis every time we put them up. And we had to go, this is wrong. What's wrong? Had to change the numbers to reflect reality. So I changed my numbers. And since then, the model has been very accurate. I've been calling it a beat grinder because of the artillery advantage Russia enjoys. Russia has walked away from old school frontal assaults into a more there's a word there that I'm missing.
Methodological.
Bingo. Thank you very much. Give a Marine multiple syllables and we will fumble it every single time. Yeah. But there's a methodology involved in the Russian approach that takes advantage of their superiority in artillery to grind the enemy down before moving in on them. And they've done that very well. When the Ukrainians received their input, their infusion of NATO weaponry, I was one of the only people who came out and said, this is a game changer. This will fundamentally change the nature of this conflict. Not that Russia's going to lose, but Russia no longer has sufficient resources to match the new problem set. The numbers change in the giant Janus computer. And Ukraine, sure enough, launched counteroffensives that took over Kharkov, took over the right bank of the Kherson region. But then I said, Russia will stabilize the line because now they consolidated their numbers. My Janus numbers were good, and the Russian defenses have held. Now we have a situation where Ukraine has literally burned through all of its resources. They have no replenishment ability left. Russia, on the other hand, has very low burn numbers, but they have massive replenishment. They're bringing in 300,000 plus troops, reservists, and volunteers that have been mobilized, trained, and equipped. They're bringing them in, and they're getting ready to launch an offensive for which Ukraine has no answer. There's nothing in the computer to generate forces. This isn't a computer game where you can artificially create tank units and all that. You need manpower, you need training. Ukraine doesn't have it. And if Russia is able to launch this offensive and sustain this offensive between now and, say, August, this war is over. And there's no reason to believe that Ukraine is going to receive an infusion of both manpower and equipment and able to marry the equipment up with the manpower, train it, and put it into battle in a timely fashion. This is why Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, when asked about U.S. M1 Abrams tanks, he said two things. One, he said, we need more of them. 30 just isn't going to do it. And they said, well, if they arrive in August, as some people say, he said, that will be too late. Why would that be too late? Because Ukraine will lose this conflict by then. He talked about the reality of the military situation. Russia is winning and will win this war unless something is done to change the numerical values that are put in the giant Janus computer of life.
Well, and this brings me to another question. Did any of your analysis include some of the other signs that were happening, being such that, like, for instance, there was a secret, apparently, meeting where they were trying to offer, that Russia could have 20% of Ukraine? That's what U.S. intelligence was doing, this, and I don't know the validity of this, but were there any other things that came into your analysis, or was it purely just the numbers?
Well, no, at that time, again, I think I and everybody else was confused because of the mixed signals that were being sent. We didn't know how to read the data we were receiving because we didn't know. I don't think anybody knew that Russia. I think most people assumed that the Russian negotiating tactic at the time was one of dictating an outcome to the Ukrainians. Very few people believed that Russia would operate from a position of strength to accept a lesser peace deal. Right. Turns out, however, Russia was seeking a lesser peace deal because Russia desperately wanted peace, not because they were being defeated, because they never wanted this war to begin with. In the three negotiating sessions that took place in March of 2022, they built the framework where basically it was acknowledged that in the end Russia would allow the Ukrainian because Russia said demilitarization, denazification, and to most people that meant that the military had to be dismantled, destroyed, and the Zelensky regime would have to leave. But through these three negotiations, which again weren't shared with the general public at the time, Russia agreed that the Zelensky government would stay, that the Ukrainian military would stay. They just couldn't be part of NATO. And in exchange, Russia would withdraw from all territory except the Donbass and Crimea. So that would be that. And that was the deal that was going to be signed in Istanbul on 1 April. And so when you look at all that, for instance, a lot of people, when you look at, it got confusing how to interpret what was going on. The Russian drive towards Kiev, was it an effort to capture the city, or was it a feint? Was it to create a presence to influence negotiations? People who interpret it as an effort to capture the city, therefore interpret Russia's decision to pull back as a sign of weakness. The same thing in the Sumy area when Russia came in and threatened Kiev, from the east. The decision to pull back was seen as a sign of weakness, that this was a Russian defeat. But now that we know about the negotiations in totality, we know that was not the case, that Russia actually withdrew, as it said at the time, as a good faith measure to demonstrate the seriousness. Meaning if Russia says on negotiating on the paper that, hey, look, we don't have any intent to keep all this territory. We just want, the Donbass to be respected and Crimea to be ours. The best way to prove that is to withdraw. But the problem is, when Russia withdrew, many people in the West went, We've beaten them. They're weak.
Right.
So therefore, why give them a peace settlement when we can continue this conflict and beat them down? So the West then doubled down on stupid and then injected billions of dollars to create the counteroffensives we already talked about. But those, Russia was never going to beat because Russia never was beat. Russia didn't retreat from Kiev or Sumy because they were defeated. They retreated as part of a legitimate diplomatic effort to resolve this, the same way Russia's always treated this, the whole Minsk Accords, negotiated by Germany and France on behalf of Ukraine. None of those parties that I just named were serious about this. It was always a sham, a delaying tactic to buy time to build up the Ukrainian military. Russia was the only party that was serious about a peaceful outcome. Russia's always been searching for a peaceful outcome until today. Russia's not, even though they claim it. I think
and this brings me to like a bombshell that was just dropped. And it shouldn't have been a bombshell because it's just because the way the Western media is not really reporting. But finally, an investigative journalist, surprisingly in the West, named Seymour Hersh, released a document yesterday, investigative report, and he's already being slammed, even though he's a Pulitzer Prize winner, and he's called out U.S. government before for Vietnam and for an action in Vietnam and for also in Iraq. And now this latest reporting firmly puts the blame of the Nord Stream pipeline being exploded by the U.S. directly by Joe Biden's involvement with CIA, the U.S. Navy, and Norway. Now, if this is true, this is civilian infrastructure worth $20 billion or more, and to take such an action is not only an act of war, it's a war crime. Now, of course, the White House is denying it, right? And CIA is denying it, and they're saying it's not true and it's fiction. And I think Seymour is probably enduring some attacks, but he's standing by his reporting and even laid out how it was done remotely, how they exploded the pipeline, which has had a huge economic impact on all of Europe, all of the U.S. And I guess it was supposed to have an impact on Russia, because for those who don't know, the Nord Stream pipelines run from Russia to Germany and Europe and supply the natural gas at a cheaper amount. So I'm assuming, know about this report. What is your thoughts? Because the Western media was acting like it was some big mystery, like who blew up the pipeline, and it's like, okay.
Let me start off with full disclosure, as they like to say in the business.
Okay.
Seymour Hersh and I have been good friends for 25 years.
Okay.
I know him very, very well,
Okay.
and so I need to say that because people will, who know this might say, well, Scott Ritter's biased towards Seymour Hersh. Well, I am biased towards Seymour Hersh because I recognize him as one of the finest investigative journalists that has ever lived. And I know this because I was actually the subject of a Seymour Hersh investigation. Back in 1998, he was writing a main article for me, about me, for the New Yorker. And, what I learned in surviving a Seymour Hersh investigation is that the man tells the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and so help him God. And everything he says is fact checked, triple checked, quadruple checked. And I can't take umbrage with anything that he reported. And that told me that this is a man of high integrity.
Right.
And therefore, and I've known him forever, and I just know his approach. And so when Seymour Hersh published this article, and I had no advance notice of this article, I didn't know.
Oh, okay.
It's not like he called me up and said, Scott, I'm writing this bombshell piece. No, he's an investigative journalist who sits on the sources up until time to release it. I was surprised as anybody when this article came out. But what I can say is that because he's such the consummate professional, you can take what he writes to the bank. This isn't the first time that the CIA has said Seymour Hersh got it wrong, only to eat the mud later on. This is the first time the U.S. government has said Seymour Hersh got it wrong, only to have to say, no, not only did he get it right, he got it all right. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you right now, you can take this report to the bank. So it's not just evidence of an American act of war against Germany. Let's remember that. This was a German pipeline, a German consortium, German strategic infrastructure. This wasn't the United States attacking Russia. This was the United
Right.
States attacking Germany, our
Mhm.
ally, our close ally, and we used Norway to achieve this attack.
And that's against the NATO principles, I think, Article 5, right?
Say again?
It's against the NATO principles to go after another ally, Article 5, right?
It's international law. Forget
Yeah, it's
NATO.
international law.
There are no NATO principles. NATO is an unprincipled organization.
That's true. That's true. But
This is-
international law, you're not supposed to go after your NATO. Yeah, but yeah, I get you. Yeah, but
Now, Russia, Russia has said, Russia's been denied the opportunity to investigate this for some time. They've done their own investigation and they have reached their own conclusions. They called it an Anglo-Saxon attack, meaning the United States and Great Britain. I think Seymour Hersh has provided them with very specific information, provided all of us. He didn't write this on behalf of Russia. He wrote on behalf of the American people and on behalf of the freedom-loving world where truth is the most important tool. And so Seymour Hersh has provided everybody with specific information. But if you're the Russians and your intelligence service collected, pieces of information, for instance, they may have detected some of these tones that Hersh talks about, but they weren't able to put them in a proper perspective. So now he talked about the release of a sonar buoy and the tones, and now the Russians are going to go, that's what the tones are, and it confirms this. Russia has said that the United States will be held to account. So I think Russia is accepting what Seymour Hersh has written at face value. It'd be interesting to see what Germany does, because after all, Germany was attacked by the United States, which carried out an economic Pearl Harbor against Germany. Germany has paid a horrific economic price because of this. What will Germany do about this? What will the European Union do, seeing the strongest economy in the European Union being attacked by the United States? This is a bombshell article that could possibly resonate long and wide. I mean, this is why Seymour Hersh earned his Pulitzer Prize and deserves another Pulitzer Prize.
But I have a question about Norway. Why would Norway? I mean, I have my theories. My theory is it's economic, obviously. But what is your theory about Norway wanting to collude with U.S. Navy and CIA to carry out this operation from I guess from that point? That's where that was their starting point.
We got to look at it from a geopolitical standpoint and an economic standpoint. Norway feels very exposed being up there in the north, sharing sharing a border with Russia, and so Norway and the United States have been entering into expanded military relationships, and as a result of this expansive military relationship, Norway and the United States tend to collude on things, and therefore it's only natural that you collude with Norway for something like this, where the Norwegians have resources that would be valuable for us from a masking standpoint, how to mask it, that it wasn't an American thing. But perhaps the most important thing is for Norway's own selfish economic reasons. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines were direct competitors with Norwegian natural gas. But by blowing up these pipelines at the same time, because the next day Norway opened up a major gas pipeline that literally ran through the Baltic into Poland, and Norway opened that up, and now Norway is able to not only sell gas to Poland, but that gas can be resold now to a Germany that's desperate for new sources of supply for gas. So there's also an economic benefit to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a stunning, like you said, explosive report, no pun intended there. But what I wanted to say was about the pipeline is how the media covered it. They made it seem so mysterious, and even saying that it blew up itself, right? Like and you probably saw the memes where they had, oh, the Nord Stream pipeline killed itself, and then forgot to turn on, and then the camera was turned off. And, I mean, it was just ridiculous what the media was saying, because even Sweden, I think, came out with an investigation. This was sabotage. Like, it's not hard. And even, you had Victoria Nuland and you had Joe Biden out there spilling the tea right before it happened, basically saying that they were going to stop the Nord Stream pipeline. And then it exploded a few months later. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, even before Seymour Hersh's piece, I would have been able to prosecute the United States successfully in any jurisdiction in the world. Why? Because I have a confession from the President of the United States. A confession. He made it in public. He said, I will, if Russia invades Ukraine, I will make Nord Stream 2 go away. We have a similar confession from Victoria Nuland talking with Senator Ted Cruz about turning it into a pile of junk. And then afterwards, she even says, I'm very happy it's been turned. Now, if the United States is a true friend of Germany, why would we be happy that a $12 billion piece of German infrastructure is now junk at the bottom? That should be telling. But, there's also something, cui bono, who benefits?
Who does benefit?
Well, gosh, I mean, Tony Blinken came out and almost wringing his hands going, oh, this is too bad. But this is a great opportunity now to wean Germany away from Russian gas onto American gas. And we will profit from this because we will be selling to our good German friends gas at 4 or 5 times the value or the price of what they were paying for the Russians. We benefit by destroying the German economy, driving German jobs to America, driving German industries to America. So the United States benefits from it. And then the last thing is the smoking gun. Before Seymour Hersh provided the details of what had happened, it was apparent to everybody that Bolt Ops 22 operated there, that there was deep mining exercises taking place next to the pipelines. So you have the military means, you have cui bono who benefits, and you have a confession.
Right.
So I think I could take that circumstantial case. Let me put it this way. There are men and women populating American prisons today who are convicted on weaker circumstantial cases than this.
So what's the next step, do you think? Do you think there will be some steps taken now that this reporting has, obviously they're trying to deny it, but there's a lot of verifications, a lot of ways to verify it. And like you said, a circumstantial case that can be applied. So what's the next step here?
Well, if you're waiting for the United States to do right by this story, you won't. I think logically, the next step should be taken by Germany. Germany should undertake a very serious investigation and hold America accountable.
Pretty much in the U.S. pocket right now. I mean,
they do, but at some point in time, I got to be careful with the analogies I use because they would be politically incorrect. But even an abused spouse has to call out the abuse of her husband at some point. Germany is very much an abused spouse, but at some point in time, Germany is going to have to say America is the abuser because we are the abuser. And this right now, the evidence is, it can't be reconciled. It's there. It's proof. Germany can't ignore it. And at some point in time, the German Bundestag is going to have to grow into adulthood and make the proper adult steps of calling to account those who have brought harm to your nation. And that's the United States of America.
And I guess, this brings me to the next question, because Germany has been, very vocal about helping Ukraine or getting weapons and aid to Ukraine, as well as, I know that they are, Alina Lipp is a reporter from Germany who reported accurately about Donbass, that some of the residents there wanted to be with Russia, that were happy that Russia was there and felt safer because they had been living under shelling by their own, the Kiev regime. And so she is facing criminal charges in Germany for her accurate reporting. So they've been very, very hawkish about participating in this proxy war against Russia. And so it'll be interesting to see going forward. Now you have Zelensky making the European tour, asking for more money and F-16s. Now, what happens when it rises to the level of F-16s, and where are the pilots, and how do they even deal with that?
Well, that's the absurdity of it. There won't be any F-16s over Ukraine ever.
Okay.
If that happens, that means that Russia was unable to win this war, and this war dragged on to the point that Ukraine was able to train pilots, receive the F-16s, learn to maintain them, build or restore airfields so the F-16 can operate, et cetera. This is something that will take years. So this conflict will have to drag on for years for that to happen. So it's simply not going to happen. This is a political mumbo jumbo put out by, I believe, by European politicians backed by their American counterparts to create a perception that they are doing everything possible to help Zelensky, when the reality is anybody worth their salt who's looking at what's happening realizes, as Zelensky does, that come August, it's over. It's too late. Ukraine loses decisively.
I see. Okay. Well, and you and I both being American, I know I have strong feelings about this proxy war. I don't like it. I don't think Russia's our enemy. I don't like the way, the coup happened in 2014 and the $100 billion that's been thrown at Ukraine in aid and weapons. So I'm going to be speaking, as well as you are, at the Rage Against the War Machine, February 19th. That's Sunday at about 1:30 in Washington, D.C. And I hope everyone can go. And I know you're one of the speakers, and I know there was a little bit of stuff around that. And just, we can talk briefly about that, but like you were invited, then disinvited, and then re-invited. But basically, what I've noticed is there's a lot of very different people from different political backgrounds, political ideologies, and they're all going to be converging on this event. And it's mostly led by conservatives and libertarians, and which begs the question, what happened to the Democrat, being anti-war? What happened, because they were anti-war in Vietnam. All of a sudden, they're the hawks. They're the ones who are, at least that's my perception. So I'm going because I feel so strongly against this conflict, and I do not want the U.S. to be enemies with Russia. So that's my reasoning. What's your reasoning, and how's it going? And I know you're going to be speaking, and I'm really happy that you are.
Well, I appreciate that, but unfortunately, I have to break news with you right now. I'm not going. And I'll say this. Clearly, there was an element that didn't want me to go, and they were threatening to bring an end to this. And this rally is too important to be sacrificed on behalf of one individual. So I'm not going to attend. I wish everybody the greatest success at this rally. I'll be listening to you and others. But if my participation creates conditions that destroy this rally, then that's just not worth that's just not the right thing to do. So I think it's important that you speak. I think it's important that everybody speaks. And, in order to preserve this opportunity, I won't be attending the rally. I will be attending. I'll be there.
Oh, you'll be there? I would, I hope that you do speak, Scott, and I think that you come from a place of expertise and a perspective that just isn't shared by a lot of people. You have something to offer. So, I hope you rethink it. I will stand by you, and I will advocate for you. And I'm not worried about hecklers. I know that was one of the concerns. As you know, I get daily dragged in the press, weekly now, maybe monthly. So it's gotten a little bit less, but we're all used to having to come up against that. And I know you're not worried about that. I think other people that are participating are very happy that you're there, at least people I know. And so you'll have a group of people around you, and we want to hear your voice. Your voice is needed, and it's strong, and I advocate that you use it. I know I will see you there, but I am hoping, and I will hope to hear you speak. And that's what I wish to hear, because you have a lot of wisdom to bring. And right now, the only conversation should be about trying to protect humanity from nuclear war. And, not going into that subject, any further with the speakers thing, I wanted to ask you about that. Are we on the brink of nuclear war, or do you think we'll pull back?
Yeah, I think we're very close to nuclear war. And if we don't take this threat seriously and embark on policy discussions, such as hopefully will be generated by this rally, it doesn't bode well for the next generation of Americans or anybody in this world, because a nuclear conflict doesn't just destroy the United States, it destroys the world.
Well, as always, I appreciate your candor, and I look forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C., and we'll see each other there. And thank you so much again for coming on the show and, educating all of us about what's happening right now. Thank you, Scott.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Take care.
Mm-hmm.
Is Joe Biden Bernie Sanders? Yesterday, the Wall Street Journal published an article titled, Joe Biden is Bernie Sanders, making the claim that because of Joe Biden's proposal for a billionaire's tax and his sweeping infrastructure plan, he's the most progressive Democratic president they've ever seen thus far. So progressive, he is Bernie Sanders. Joining us to discuss this is Sabrina Salvanti. You may know her from the Sabby Sab Show. She is the host, and she's also the co-host of the Revolutionary Black Network. Sabby, welcome to the show. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Tara. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, that's great. So I don't know if you've been, well, I know you've been kind of calling out the progressives really well, actually, about them not really standing up for working folks. And did you see the oversight committee hearing with AOC and all of that? And I just wanted your thoughts on where the progressives are going and what happened. And AOC was, promoting censorship at the oversight hearing. What are your thoughts on that?
I did see it. I think, this is a classic tale of what we've seen before with people that go into the Democratic Party that try to push back against Democratic Party leadership. So Cynthia McKinney had this experience. Dennis Kucinich also had this experience. And those individuals were pushed out of the Democratic Party. They were pushed out of their seats by Democratic leadership. I think what happened, I think in the beginning, some of the progressives actually did have good intentions going into these positions to fight back and to push back. We did see when AOC was first elected, she did protest outside of Nancy Pelosi's office. And then there must have been a conversation shortly after that, because after that experience, she was on The View when she was calling Nancy Pelosi Mama Bear. So someone had a talking to, I would say. I think that they realized that in order to keep their seats, that they have to go along with Democratic Party leadership. And that's unfortunate because that's not what Justice Democrats was designed for. It was designed for the exact opposite. But at this point, what's really disappointing is that they have seemed to convince the American people that they are socialists, that they are further left, when in reality, they've just gone along with corporate Democrats. So I think that's the downfall that we see with the situation, is that it gives people the impression, working class people, the impression that there is someone in there fighting for them when they're really not.
Right. Yeah. And what was really stunning was that in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and I talked about it to the audience right before you came on, they were talking that Bernie Sanders, actually, they were talking about Joe Biden and comparing him to Bernie Sanders. Now, I've met Joe Biden. He's no Bernie Sanders, but they're calling him the most progressive Democrat in history. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I was baffled by that statement.
I think part of the problem is you have some of the progressives, including Bernie Sanders, saying that Joe Biden is doing a great job or giving him an A grade, congratulating him for things that he really should not be congratulated for. So I think Joe Biden took some of Bernie Sanders' talking points and he did distribute those during the State of the Union address, like we need to fight for the working class, we got to protect the workers, those types of talking points that came from that Bernie Sanders campaign and that progressive movement. So because he's saying those things, you do have some people saying, oh, Joe Biden is just like Bernie Sanders, which is absolutely ridiculous. Joe Biden did explain to people during the State of the Union address that he is a capitalist. Bernie Sanders describes himself as a democratic socialist. So how are they the same? They're not the same. If he were Bernie Sanders, we would be having something like Medicare for all right now, which Joe Biden said that he would veto that bill if it came across his desk. So I think, again, the problem with putting progressives through the Democratic Party is that it gives people the impression that the Democratic Party has moved further to the left, when I would argue the Democratic Party has moved further to the right, especially when you look at issues such as censorship and war as well. So it gives people a false impression. And when doing that, when they do that, that actually silences the voices of those who actually are further to the left, because they've kind of been drowned out. Look at the Progressive Caucus. How many people in the Progressive Caucus are actually progressive? Some of them don't even support Medicare for all, but they're allowed to be a part of an organization that was co-founded by Bernie Sanders, and there's no pushback from it. So I think a lot of these people have just become careerists, and that's all they care about at this point in time.
Yeah, it's really amazing too. Joe Biden's domestic policy to me doesn't seem progressive at all. I mean, that's my perception of it. And in fact, We look at the debacle with the railroad. You look at some of the other workers that were trying to, come forward and have some real labor issues, uplifted by some of these members of Congress. It just doesn't happen. So I think it's almost like we're being just gaslighted. I mean, I don't know if that's into believing because he's going to be running for president again that he's actually progressive when he's not.
100%. And when you talk about the railroad workers, I think it's important for people to remember that even though the Senate voted against the 7-day sick leave, Joe Biden could have implemented that by executive order, and he chose not to. So it was really funny to me that he had the audacity to talk about protecting the workers, and he had the advantage to do that, and he chose not to do it. So I think people really need to pay attention to things that have happened along in his presidency and not just listen to what he says, because Joe Biden, there were a number of lies that he told during that State of the Union address. If we want to look at the economy, he said the economy is doing great and that prices are down. Prices are not down. I was just at the grocery store the other day. I paid $9 for a carton of eggs. He said that gas prices were down. Not where I live. The gas prices are still high. They have not gone down. But everybody will just listen to what he says and they won't actually check the evidence to see if what he's saying is actually true. Thousands of workers are being laid off by Amazon, by Google, by Facebook. But Joe Biden stood there and said to the American people that the economy is doing well. The economy is not doing well. The homelessness rate has increased in this country. We're seeing it in cities across the country. It's not just Los Angeles. It's happening here in Boston as well. It's happening in places like Austin, Texas. This is an increasing threat that we have in this country. And nobody, regardless of who they are in office, is trying to address the poverty issue that we have in this country. So I think when we look at the economics, Joe Biden has also continued some of Trump tax policies. People aren't calling that out. The progressives aren't calling that out. Kids are still in cages at the border. The progressives aren't calling that out. AOC was in tears when she saw kids at the border when Trump was in office. She doesn't have those tears now. So I think this is just a political game and it's a lot of theater. And unfortunately, the American people are the ones who are suffering as a result.
Well, I agree 100%. And I mean, you're talking about a poverty rate with children right now that's in excess of 20%. And, they're talking about cutting the school lunch programs and things like that. And they've cut back on benefits because, of course, some of the benefits were cut. So the people, that are the poorest are really suffering the most. And that brings me to the next subject is his foreign policy, right? How in the world could anyone see Joe Biden as comparable to any progressive? Well, actually, Bernie Sanders voted for it too, but I'm talking about the money going to Ukraine. Almost $100 billion at this point has gone to Ukraine in aid and weapons. So again, that brings us to what we can do to try to push back on that. And, I kind of wanted your insight about Joe Biden's foreign policy. I mean, do you see it in any way as progressive, or how do you see it?
No, this is just the same as presidents who came before him. They're trying to profit off of war. I want to remind everyone that with this conflict with Russia and Ukraine, there were peace talks in the beginning. There were negotiations in the beginning. The United States government decided not to go that route because there's more money to be made when you have war. This is also an opportunity for them to punish countries like Russia, because when we look at a country like Russia and we look at China, these are economic threats to the United States. If you were to look at the top largest banks in the world, China has 5 in the top 10. The United States only has 2. This was not always the case. So the reason why they are pushing these types of conflicts is to cripple Russia's economy and then next to cripple China's economy so the U.S. can be number 1 in the world. And here we are. The U.S. government has sent billions of dollars to Ukraine, but they can't give everybody health care in this country, or they won't give everyone health care in this country. They always say the money isn't there. They have shown us over the past year there's plenty of money there. If they were to reduce the defense budget, we could give people what they need in this country. We could give homes to everybody in this country, but they don't want to do that. They want to support companies like Lockheed Martin. They want to support companies like Raytheon, companies like Northrop Grumman, who are pretty much invested in the military industrial complex. This is a money laundering scheme. That is what this is about. How long is this conflict supposed to continue? How much more money are they going to give to Ukraine and give the American people? Very little. So more people need to call this out. And I would highly recommend that if you can do so, to participate in these rallies in your area. There are multiple rallies going on for peace in Ukraine to end this conflict. So any way that you can get involved, please do so. We need to have an anti-war movement back in this country. I don't think there's been one or been a prominent one since the Vietnam War. But I think that was more prominent because at that point in time, there was the draft. So I think it affected people more. But we have to get back to that point in this country because they are really trying to silence any type of anti-war rhetoric.
You know, it's really interesting you brought that up because I was just thinking about I'm going to be seeing you actually in Washington, D.C. at Rage Against the War Machine. We're both going to be at that rally. Do you want to talk about like what, because I'm on the West Coast, you're on the East Coast, and what the feelings are back there? Because here, there just seems to be a lack of, I don't know, no one's really getting out in the streets. No one's doing anything to protest this proxy war the US and NATO is fighting against Russia via Ukraine, which is actually what it is. And like you said, it's profiting these weapons manufacturers. So we have a chance to all meet up February 19th in DC. And I know you're going to be there, right?
Yep, I will be there. I'll be streaming the event. I think that I'm fortunate in the sense that I am on the East Coast and DC is here. A lot of those demonstrations just happen to take place in DC. We have a couple here that happen in Boston, but we don't get anywhere near the numbers that they get in DC for these types of events. So it's not far from me or too far from me. So it's easier for me to get there. But I would like to see these demonstrations happen across the country. Like more people need to know about it. The problem is, I think that the American people are heavily propagandized by mainstream media. It's CNN, it's MSNBC, it's Fox News, and the majority of Americans don't watch independent media. Unfortunately, the majority of Americans, you know, as much as people want to complain about Jimmy Dore, the majority of Americans have no idea who he is. So that's a big part of the problem is like we do have these voices, but I think our mics are a little too small, you know, at this point to reach many people. But the rally in DC, I think it's going to be huge based on what I've seen. It looks like it's going to be a good turnout. So I'm looking forward to meeting people that come there and hearing the speakers and everything. There's been some like pushback and criticism about the rally, about some of the speakers. That's a whole nother story. But I think that it's tricky because I've been to multiple rallies and I've organized with other organizations such as Massachusetts, like Peace Action here in Boston. There's always going to be someone. There's always going to be someone who's a speaker who people may have issues with. I think it is up to the organizers at this point to decide what direction they do want to go in. But I will say, like, if you can come out, if you can't come to that rally, there's another one in March that's by Answer Coalition, also for peace in Ukraine. If you can come to that one, that would be great as well.
You know, I think it's really important. And it's February 19th, Rage Against the War Machine. And you can check it out. Sabby will be there. I'm one of the speakers, as is Kim Iverson. And I believe some other prominent people, of course, Jimmy Dore will be speaking. Scott Horton, Max Blumenthal, Scott Ritter, and some others will be at that rally talking about it. And I believe even Tulsi Gabbard will be showing up. So you have like, what I found interesting about this particular rally is that it's organized by libertarians. It's organized by many people that perceive as the right. There's some conservatives there. And then you have some lefties as well. And so you have this convergence. So of course, there's a little bit of drama. There always would be with groups like that coming together, right? But I guess I wanted to ask you one last question before you go here is about where is the progressives? Why did Bernie Sanders and AOC vote for the war? Why aren't their voices being heard in DC?
That's a good question. And there have been activists that have approached them at town halls. I'm sure you've seen Jose and a couple of others as well that have approached them and asked that very same question. At this point, I think it's best for AOC and Bernie Sanders to answer that question. Why did you vote for it? You know, if you're a part of Democratic Socialists of America, you're not supposed to be pro-war. You're supposed to be against that. Why did they choose to be strike breakers in reference to the railroad workers? Again, that is against principles of Democratic Socialists of America, which they're a part of. So I think what it's going to take is some of these organizations that they're members of pushing back on them and honestly removing them from the organization at this point if they don't represent the principles. But I think they're not going to do that because their organization is propped up by those names, by those members. So I think that's a big part of the problem. But I think they voted for it in an attempt to get along with Democratic leadership. Whatever Democrat leadership tells them to do, that's what they're going to do. And it's unfortunate at this point. And I think they need to stop calling themselves progressives, to be honest.
Well said. Thank you so much, Sabby. And for those that want to find you, tell them a little bit about the Sabby Sab Show, which is your podcast, when that is and what time.
Yes, you can find me on YouTube at Sabby Sabs. I usually stream on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sundays. Or you can find me on Revolutionary Blackout Network. There's a collection of us there. Of the members of the group. So you'll hear multiple different voices, not just mine. And you can find us there. I mean, we stream like every day over on Revolutionary Blackout Network.
Well, great. And I also see some of your work on INN. They post it too, Indie News Network. So shout out to Indy and Reef that do that hard work. And thank you for all that you do. And you're right. We need more independent voices in media being heard so our audiences can hear it, like Kim Iverson show, like your show, Sabby Sabs, and like the Black Revolutionary Network. So thank you so much for joining us today. And Sabby, I really look forward to seeing you in person in Washington, D.C. So we'll see you then.
Thanks so much, Tara.
It's looking like James O'Keefe, the founder of Project Veritas, is being ousted from his own company via an internal coup. Now, news reports initially said that James had taken leave, but a whistleblower has come forward claiming that it's a coup from certain board members. Now, interestingly, this comes right after James O'Keefe had that bombshell reporting about Pfizer. Now, here with us today is a media expert, Jackie Jordan. She's an author, host of Front and Center with Jackie Jordan, and CEO and founder of TV Guestpert. Jackie, it's so good to see you again. Welcome to the show.
I love seeing you here, Tara. It's fantastic to see you sharing Kim's seat.
Yeah. And so, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. There's a lot going on. I was going to talk to you about censorship in general, and then a couple of huge stories broke that I really wanted your feedback on. And the first one is, of course, the James O'Keefe Project Veritas.
Yeah, we don't like that at all, do we? Nope, that's not good.
No, what happened? What are you hearing now? Because I've been, doing this in the studio. Like, what's going on? The latest I heard was a whistleblower came forward and said he was actually ousted, and there was some sort of coup with the board. So what are you hearing?
Well, I'm just suspecting. I think it's got Pfizer's fingerprints all over it. He just came out with two extraordinarily explosive videos that were very damning, and for what many of us already knew about Pfizer, which made that concrete. And then I always look at what the media narrative is. Like last week, after the second Pfizer video came out from Project Veritas, we go from a green meteor that was discovered from 55,000 years old to a Chinese balloon that needs to be shot down. Like, that's the kind of media distraction that happens over incidents like this. It would not be James O'Keefe's choice to step down. And remember, he started this in his parents' backyard, and it's now a $20 million venture. So there's a lot of money at stake as well at this. But I believe that if James O'Keefe is getting pulled, his followers who built up this company will follow James O'Keefe with the money.
Right. And, you've been in media for a long time, and you know a lot about the different players. Have you ever seen anything like this happen before, where a major story like this, a major corporation, can basically take down a whole publishing company?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I've been in television as a producer for my whole career, 20 plus years, not to age myself, but I remember being on the news desk at News 12 New Jersey would be an example. I was working on the news desk, and I learned really quickly that the formula was to lead with the most shocking video, and then the commercials were all pharmaceutical commercials. And I just intuitively picked that up in the 1990s. And so the pharmaceutical companies have been the owners of big media. And, as a producer who's produced for Montel Williams, Geraldo Rivera, WBIS, which was a Wall Street Journal entity, CNBC, of all the many places that I worked for, we very much were given topics to talk about and topics not to talk about. There was a long period of time where we were never allowed to talk about breast cancer. Just weren't allowed to talk about breast cancer. In the late 90s, like you could pitch until you were blue in the face, another breast cancer story, and it was shot down. And what I later recognized is that they were waiting to pick up breast cancer as a story again when they came out with the testing for the BRCA gene. And that was a pharmaceutical-based testing for that two companies became. And so when you start to follow the money behind the stories, you understand how these media narratives are placed. So the James O'Keefe coup is, I think it's a shock because we associate James O'Keefe with Project Veritas. Of course, we want to make sure that he's okay because we have not heard from him, and it's very unusual not to hear from James O'Keefe since this has been announced by the company. And then, I call it Andrew Cuomoing him in the workplace. So what we're going to go after character assassination and try, for what he's doing. And of course, if anybody I'm talking to who would know that better, it would be you, of course. In terms of,
well, you're right. I mean, it can be weaponized. I mean, that's the thing. It can be weaponized if it's not legit, or it can be weaponized and suppressed into silence, right? So it depends on the political angle that it's being used for, I guess, which is really sad for actual victims of crime, right? But in James O'Keefe's case, he really exposed something with Pfizer that was, I mean, it's criminal, basically, right?
Absolutely. Well, in criminal, it's genocide. If we want to really, if we want to call it out for what it is, that they had knowledge that the vaccines were going to injure people and that they're deliberately mutating the virus so that they can keep the vaccines. I mean, what could be more criminal than that? And just wanting to address the workplace situation because it's so pertinent to your experience and your relevancy in the collective media narrative. And I had a personal conversation with yesterday with somebody unrelated to all of what we're talking about. But I remember her, she said that she was dealing with her own company's board, and she said to me that they were really abusive. And I said to her, were they abusive? Like, are you in threat? Are you in physical threat? She says, well, other people witnessed it too. And I said, fair enough. I said, but are you being abused like you are physically or financially, or being threatened, like we need to call a police and do a police report, like in the case that you experienced, or are we dealing with an asshole? Excuse me, but there are workplace assholes, and they're different. They're not the same. They're not always the same thing. And so I just want to qualify that in the craziness of our work culture, because there are a lot of jerks that are in the workplace. And I don't know, James, whether O'Keefe is or isn't. He looks like an incredibly high intense guy, a high intense personality. I can tell that, there's a lot at stake for what he's doing. And if he's built this up from the ground up, I'm sure he probably could get wound up in terms of it. Is that enough to give him a paid leave and just quiet him? I'm not buying it.
Yeah, it was really shocking to see that. And then on the heels of the Pfizer, very suspicious to everyone. And you're seeing a lot of activity on social media, a lot of support for him, actually, and calling out of Project Veritas. And they were still like basically trying to fundraise for their thing. But what's really sad about it is someone made the comparison that Project Veritas without James O'Keefe is like it's Fox News without Tucker Carlson.
Without Tucker Carlson, exactly.
Yeah, like you got to have James O'Keefe. But their investigative reporting they didn't care about the political ramifications. They were really going after something. And I know that they've been criticized. I know that they're controversial sometimes for some of their reporting
tactics
that had been incorrect or whatever. But, we don't have many real investigative reporters anymore.
Not at all. No, it's completely discouraged. And, I think, they were already raided by the FBI in the New York office a couple years ago. And I've watched Project Veritas grow from their very grassroots origins when they were, beginning their crowdsource funding just to get it going. So they've been at it, for a while. But you're absolutely right. When I was coming up in the 90s through television, it was like Inside Edition was at that time the big
Right. I remember
investigative.
that.
Right, and those were the type of stories, but they were kind of more sensationalized, and then it got even more sensationalized. But the type of journalism that we would expect to see, we're just like we don't experience. And it's very funny because even on my podcast, Front and Center, I will talk with different producers in my industry because we are always been held to a really high standard of research and documentation and second sourcing and triple sourcing of content. So it is really painful to be in an industry where there isn't that kind of value and trust anymore for the type of work, integrity it's the agenda is just taken over the work ethic of the majority. And
Yeah. I mean,
one of the things I want to even just implement through my own work is just media memberships, where we identify integrity in media, and we pass out media membership awards and for integrity. And certainly James O'Keefe would be on that, because what he's been revealing in the past couple of years is really flipped the collective narrative on in really important stories that we've all needed to have confirmed. And
I
other
think
people
it's one
needed to
of the
hear.
most important stories. I mean, we were all, well, I knew you at that time, in 2020 when I was writing my book. We were all in lockdown, and how we had to operate and how we had to work. We couldn't do book signings. Our whole lives were at hostage to all of this.
Hijacked.
And then come to find out this pharmaceutical company is engaging in this. It's really awful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we also know the profit that was made by the pharmaceutical companies over the last couple of years, and that money hasn't gone to help and solve the problems that it could in the world. And I always say that all problems are simple, all solutions are simple. It's simply
Mhm.
that greed gets in the way of solving those problems.
That's a good
And if
point.
you
And there was another story I saw last night that just broke. I wanted to ask you about, simultaneously. Speaking of media, was News Nation. A News Nation reporter was put down on the ground and handcuffed. I don't know if you were aware of that, and arrested for talking to some train personnel. What was your view on that? I mean, what's that about?
Yeah, I'm not really quite sure. I've been following the News Nation development as a
Hmm.
network. And have appeared
Right.
on it a couple times.
Yeah.
Bill Shine, who used to be President Donald Trump's press secretary and also ran Fox News Channel as a consultant on News Nation.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Vargas went over to News Nation. I was a little
Yes.
confounded by Chris Cuomo going over to News Nation. I found
Yeah.
that confounding. And he also he took with him his CNN producing team. So News Nation is really interesting. But was a journalist is talking to a personnel and
Train
gets
personnel.
arrested.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting a little dicey for sure. Do you hear my cat's trying
It's
to talk
getting
to you, Tara?
hostile towards journalists. And I know you have been aware of the Twitter files and what it's been revealing about censorship and narratives. And one of the things about media narratives, because you have this long breadth of history, what are you noticing right now with just kind of in general media narratives, and what's your view on that?
Well, I think that my whole entire real life's body of work is to call out media narratives, because what people don't
Mhm.
understand is that they're really being manipulated, emotionally manipulated, psychologically manipulated by the narratives that are put out. Like that whole Chinese balloon thing, I'm just saying, like, you could not get me to buy into that story. Like, I did not buy, that was not an opt-in on my end. And now with
Mhm.
the way that we're doing technology, they're collecting all of our data, they're collecting our reactions, they're collecting our emoji reactions, and this is how we get programmed and funneled into the type of media news stories that are going to be our future psyops. And so I'm just saying it. That's the way it goes. Tara, you're one of the most perfect examples of that, which is
Mhm.
why I was pursuing you and blessed to meet you. But in your situation, it was me too, me too, me too, me too, and then it was like, whoop, left
Mhm.
out. No longer
Yeah, left
convenient.
out.
We're just gonna we're just
Yep.
gonna drop that right here. Shh. and now, and then it went bad girl, shame, bad girl, and
Yeah.
that's what our technology has, that's how we've now participated on what I call our own imprisonment, because we give over our data, our reactions, our emotions, and what was going to stick and what's not going to stick. And I even with the elections, I even just said, if Wolf Blitzer calls the election, who's going to say it's not going to be true? And that's what kind of played out. Is that, so if it's on TV, it must be true.
Really, really well put. Really well put. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for joining us. How can people find your work and find your show?
Well, we're still on YouTube as of now, at Front and Center with Jackie Jordan. And so as of now, we're still on it. We might be making the move to Rumble.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. It was delightful to see you again. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching tonight. This is our new time, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll be here every night from now on, Monday through Friday. And tomorrow, Kim will be back. You won't want to miss this. It's a sit-down interview with Dennis Kucinich. So thank you so much for watching today. Good night.